The American sanctions imposed by the U.S. Treasury Department on June 12 were among the most painful for the Russian banking system. In addition to Pромsvязьбанк, Внешкомбанк, Sberbank of Russia, VTB Bank and VTB Capital Holding, which are key to the Kremlin, the Moscow Exchange, the National Clearing Center and the National Settlement Depository fell under the restrictions. The next day, the Moscow Exchange was forced to stop trading in dollars and euros. The Kremlin's hopes for the yuan also failed. Operations have become more complicated, and from the mid-August they are at risk of shutting down completely.
Trading volumes of yuan at Moscow Exchange went down sharply. In July, it averaged was 88 billion rubles a day, which is a third lower than in June and half as much as in January. At the same time, trading in other friendly currencies began to collapse. For example, the turnover in the Turkish lira shrunk to 20-30 million rubles a day, although last year it exceeded 1 billion rubles. The largest non-bank broker in the country announced that it had temporarily stopped operations with lira on the exchange market for its clients. From the Moscow Times. We can see that everything is shrinking. Chinese banks and Chinese payment systems are gradually stopping to work with Russia's major players. Payments to China are not going through well. These are systemic problems. At some cases it works, but in general there are at least big delays, and many people are unable to make payments even in yuan. China refuses to work with more or less large companies that are in this sanctions field. And I will remind you that we have more than 60 Russian banks on the US restrictions list alone.
In addition to problems with international payments, internal crises are also getting worse in Russia. All of this is the result of the shortage of personnel, the military-industrial complex that has been artificially boosted from the budget, and inflation, which is a serious problem for the Kremlin, experts believe. The central bank continues to try to regulate the situation by raising the key rate, which has already reached 16%.
In order to fight inflation, we need systemic measures to change the entire state policy, not only economic measures. There will be inflation because of the shortage of personnel and because of the frantic financing of the military. There will be inflation because we are no longer trading with Europe and now trade at a higher cost with Asia. If all of this stay the same, then you won't be able to change it, no matter how much you increase the rate.
The worse the economic situation gets, the more the Kremlin tries to convince Russians that they are completely well off. Putin likes to brag about the GDP growth in Russia. The Federation's figure is indeed higher than, for example, in Japan or Germany. However, this is just a consequence of the overheated economy, experts explain.
While Russian GDP may be growing, the economy is increasingly geared towards the war industry, upheld by large fiscal stimulus. This is not an endless source of growth, nor a sign of a stable economy. The Kremlin's war factories are already at maximum capacity. Unemployment has fallen to the point that there are reports that Vladimir Putin approved the replacement of imprisonment for forced labor. The tight labor market has put upward pressure on wages, while the weaker ruble increases import prices and is contributing to increasingly high inflation, despite Russian central bank efforts to fight it with high interest rates. From the Guardian publication.
Russia's notorious National Welfare Fund is also being depleted. There are 5 trillion rubles left in reserve out of almost 9 trillions that were left before Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine began. In 2023, the Ministry of Finance withdrew 3 trillions from the fund to cover the budget deficit. In 2024, it plans to borrow another 1,300 billion rubles. Reported by Anastasia Tarnavska, Larissa Petruk, UATV News.